All right. Hi, everyone. My name is San. I just want to introduce myself really quickly. I am a queer feminist writer for Sakshi, and I have been interested in the issues of feminist social justice, specifically on all issues regarding sexual and domestic violence against women. So I see critiquing systems of oppression as crucial, as we are all a result of current existing systems. But I also understand that we have to address the overarching issue of attitudes, of social issues and attitudes that are informed by patriarchal systems. So 28 years ago, Sakshi set out to explore power and control. We began because of a power difference where the girl named Girl Harmed didn't get judicial justice because she was deemed to be of loose morals. We went into villages to married women who were victims of domestic violence. We took projects about sexuality to students. Throughout our work, there was a resounding need to break oppressive structures for dignity, respect, and equality. Good evening to the members of the panel and to all the guests watching today's event. Today, we will be exploring and answering some pertinent questions about sexual violence, systems of oppression and power, and the culture of domination. On our panel today, we have some of the most inspiring voices talking about gender equality, intersectionality in activism, access to healthcare, and the nuances of sexuality and politics. I would like to welcome to our panel, beginning with Shruti Sharda. Shruti Sharda is a queer feminist writer and activist. Her work and writing covers issues relating to gender-based violence, mental health, queer rights, and intersectional feminist representation. She has for over a decade worked with NGOs, nonprofits, and developmental organizations in India as a communication strategist, writer, editor, and social media community builder. Shruti is currently consulting as a communication support with Urgent Action Fund Asia and Pacific. Thank you for joining us, Shruti. Next, we have Mahima Mehra. Mahima Mehra is a sociology graduate from Lady Shri Ram College, DU. Mahima Mehra has authored publications in economic development, public health, gender, and law. She brings to the table a great deal of knowledge and experience, having previously worked with the Indian government in the Ministry of Women and Child Development. With the focus of her study being poverty and healthcare, she was recently conferred to the Sussex India Fellowship Award to pursue her master's degree in the UK. So pleased to have you here, Mahima.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Honored to be here.
No worries. Then we have the young and bold Jagisha. Jagisha Arora is a 28-year-old writer, activist, and freelance journalist. She has completed her MA in history, and her areas of expertise in writing are gender, caste, and democracy. She is a young and fierce activist, very vocal about her views. Welcome, Jagisha.
Thank you so much.
Lastly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Varuna Srinivasan. Dr. Varuna Srinivasan is a sexual reproductive health educator and specialist. She holds a degree in medicine and public health. Her activism works towards social justice and gender equity in reproductive healthcare and access to mental health services, especially for immigrant women of color. With vast knowledge and resources, she develops curriculums and uses design and data as vehicles for change in the health communication sphere. So we are so honored to have all of you with us today. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So now we speak about, collective action. This panel is about collective action. So we need to discuss the fact that, sexual violence is so rampant, amongst us. We have an issue that is so patriarchal in nature, where structures in place are so patriarchal in nature, and we're unable to like specifically tackle the issue, right? So when we speak of transformative movements that break the cycles of oppression and move towards, moving towards, compassionate systems in place, but also very accountable systems in place, making sure that these systems can be held accountable. So now the discussion of sexual violence, often a conversation that places importance on the sexual nature of the act, increasingly needs a space that acknowledges and holds the abuser accountable. So my question, like I want to start with the question of how do we hold a system accountable that does not want to hold itself accountable? Anyone can start, but Jagisha, can you just talk to us a little bit more about, the state not being held responsible when we talk about sexual violence that is so rampant in our nation?
सबको पहले हेलो, मैं इससे स्टार्ट करूंगी कि स्टेट में भी जो भी जितने भी लोग हैं वो हमारे ही बीच में से, सोसाइटी में से वहाँ पे गए हैं। तो जो हमारे घर से जो शुरुआत होती है कि घर में इतना पेट्रियार्कल जो सिस्टम होता है उसमें से ही वो लोग निकल के पॉलिटिशियंस बनते हैं, एक्टिविस्ट बनते हैं। तो सबसे पहले जो बात करनी होगी वो घर से करनी होगी। आपके साथ बात होगी तो वायलेंस की शुरुआत होती है, इतना नॉर्मलाइज किया गया है। जैसे हमारे घर में जब एक भाई अपनी बहन को मारता है तो उसे एकदम ऐसे किया जाता है कि उसको नॉर्मलाइज किया जाता है कि वो प्यार करता है इसलिए मारता है। तो इसलिए सेक्सुअल वायलेंस के हर तरीके का वायलेंस किया जाता है प्यार से।
Sorry, just quickly interrupt. Jagisha, something is wrong with your headphones.
आवाज नहीं आ रही है आपको?
हाँ, अब तो आ रही है. Sorry, my Hindi is very bad. I apologize. It's really bad.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to see, like, if you could repeat what you just said, because I couldn't hear you, and I don't think a lot of people were able to hear you.
जयेश, शायद आपके ईयरफोन्स में प्रॉब्लम है, आप निकाल दीजिए, शायद ठीक रहेगा।
Yeah, अब सुनाई दे रहा है? Can you all hear me?
Yes, better now. Yes, please go ahead again.
So my point is that ki our home is patriarchal. So from in like political leaders, political activists, so where they come from? They come from our society. So first of all, we have to talk in the home. Like we have to challenge the patriarchal system in our home. Then the sexual violence will be reduced. So start with the home first. Yeah,
I absolutely agree, because usually when we think about places of obvious domination, right, we think about the family unit, and the structure of the family unit. It serves like almost like a blueprint of outside structures. We need to analyze the patriarch within the home and the hierarchies that exist within the home, so that we can understand structures outside. Unfortunately, we have to examine the fact that this sense of domination begins at home, and we are carrying those attitudes outside. So how do we talk about addressing the issue of domination? Like, how do we really bring that apart in terms of considering that patriarchal structures are everywhere? Where do we start to challenge it, especially when we started at home, but how do we bring it outside to our state governments, our communities, and holding it accountable? Lorena, why don't you have a stab at it?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to say that I'm so excited to be here. It's really empowering for me to see 5 brown women on the screen. So thank you so much. I don't really speak or understand Hindi, so I'm going to stick to English. So I definitely think that there has to be a collective action. Sorry to pun intended, but one of the things that I focus on is working with children and working with adolescents. I think so many of us are learning sex education at a later stage. And one of the components of sex education, and I tell even my own parents, is not just like the birds and the bees. Like, we're not just going to talk about the reproductive organs, and we're not just going to talk about contraception, but we're also going to talk about what consent looks like, what boundaries look like, what healthy relationships look like. Recently in a talk, I was part of another panel where we were talking about transformative justice, like you said, like how can we start that how do you screen for perpetration essentially, or interpartner violence perpetration? And I think one of the main things is really just assessing what healthy relationships look like. And I think that can start so early if you have really young children. Telling them, saying, hey kids, what is like a healthy relationship look like to you? So do you like watch your mom being silenced at home? You know, do you watch your sister being infantilized, hypersexualized at home? And I think that it only starts with the new generation, in my opinion. I don't know what anyone else feels about that. I feel like you definitely need comprehensive sex education in schools. And in our own communities, I think there are certain adults who would be open to learning sex education, you know, from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we talk about, consent and personal boundaries within the home. I think lots of folks do not have any idea how that works, especially when it comes to children, because they're already infantilized, but at the same time, they don't seem to have any kind of sense of autonomy. But yeah, Mahima wanted to say something, please. Say.
So in Recovering Subversion, that is a book by Nivedita Menon, she talks exactly about this. She says that a woman's body, we have two kinds of women's body. We have a physical body and we have a cultural body.
Yes.
And it is automatically assumed that the physical body is to be relegated to the private space. But ultimately, it also transcends to the cultural body because of the child. The child acts as an agent of socialization, and if he sees violence being okayed at home, and a mother or a wife or an aunt not telling anybody else about the violence that has been perpetrated upon her at crowds, she's going to go outside and practice the same. So in the sense that the private relegates into the culture, it's a very interrelated sort of a relationship between the two.
Absolutely. And I think also, Shruti, I was wondering if you could also contribute to that aspect, because there tends to be this privatization of women's bodies and children's bodies, especially with children's bodies, because they don't have any social, economic, or political power whatsoever. So, and I think this also, as a fellow queer person, I also understand that how queer bodies are policed right from the get-go, because it does not conform to heterosexist ideas. But how does that, the queerness compound? How does the violence against women compound to the violence against queer folks as well, and queer children as well?
Thank you so much. I'm hoping that you're able to hear me well.
Yeah, absolutely, clearly.
Okay. I think what I'm going to say is going to be an amalgamation of all that Jagisha, Varuna, and Mahima had said. I would like to start with this understanding that I have faced violence. I have acted against violence. I continue to support survivors and victims. So I have seen maybe the array of responses and array of effects that it can have. What I have realized is that it's fantastic that we're talking about larger terms, loftier terms like collective action, we're talking about transformative change, we're talking about restorative justice. It's fantastic, absolutely. But let's never forget that every whole is made up of parts. And when we talk about larger issues like justice, recovery, healing, support, we're still dealing with human beings. As Jagisha correctly said, the justice infrastructure is extremely lopsided, extremely patriarchal, and it's not enough to say patriarchal, it is also extremely misogynistic. Not just to women, but any female presenting person, any effeminate person, any person who does not fit into the heteronormative masculine model. So when you enter that police station, the violence that you have already felt and which you have come to report, it continues, you're re-traumatized, it takes on different forms. And it really breaks your spirit, because right there, you realize that justice, as you understand it, as you have been told is what is justice, is not probably going to be accessible for you. So when I said that it is made up of smaller parts, what I mean is none of us, or I guess very few precious privileged ones amongst us, grow up with an idea of what consent, as Varuna said, means. What it means to have agency, what it means to speak up, what it means to own your body, what it means to feel about nudity, to feel about sex, to choose your partner, demand something from your partner, push back against abuse. These are very foundational concepts that most of us don't grow up with. So imagine an adult who has a very what I can say, kacha pakka understanding. So there is understanding of concept but not fully understood. There is understanding of heteronormativity but it's not fully formed. Then there is understanding of agency, it's not fully formed. These are the adults who are getting married. These are the adults who are becoming parents. These are the adults who are ultimately tragically being forced to deal with violence, and of course deal with the very, very stressful, re-traumatizing justice machinery as we understand it. We are bound to make mistakes. We are bound to approach it in an extremely flawed, extremely traumatizing manner. And from my experience, what I realized is the initial Google searches that I was doing while trying to get out from the abusive situation was very, very basic. I didn't even understand what control means. So when I first saw the circle of control, the concentric circles, and what forms it takes, it was education for me. And I was 25. I had worked, I had earned my own money, I had stepped out of the house, I have had the privilege of education, but I did not have those understandings at all. It took me a very long time to understand that my voice has weight, that I can push back, that I can yell, that I can say, no, stop, that I can say that this is not okay. So if you have a populace which doesn't have these basic understandings of what their rights are, who they are as human beings, not only in a very larger feminist human rights conversation. I'm not talking about jargon, I'm not talking about terminology, just basic understanding of what they can stand for, what they can demand. Collective action is always going to be difficult, it's going to be flawed, and it is going to take many, many layers of mistakes to get to a point where we actually understand how to make it work when it comes to gender-based violence or violence of any form, be it sexual or anything else. And as rightly pointed out, it has to start at home. And it doesn't have to start at dictation. It has to start with behavior, with children watch and learn.
Yeah.
With children see every day, and that's why imbibe in themselves. It is the most powerful lesson to give to children if you're behaving well and in a respective manner, in a respectful manner, and also acknowledging their consent right from the start, acknowledging their right to individuality, right to their body, right to refuse hugs, right to refuse kisses. All of this you can sit and maybe make a textbook out of, which is going to be absolutely useless. But if you apply it on a daily basis, they will learn, they will apply it, they'll demand for it. And the other thing I'm hoping that we can also discuss is the idea of justice. Again, when I was personally dealing with it, and even today when I am speaking with GBV survivors, it is extremely re-traumatizing to come out and speak again and again about what has gone on. And if our justice machinery is demanding that of survivors, it is a clear causation as to why so many of them do not want to come out and speak about it. So even the concept of justice, as we understand it, whether it's restorative or of any other form, especially Jagisha also probably can speak about, because caste-based violence is an extremely intergenerational violence.
Yeah.
We need survivors and victims to inform what justice also means, instead of us dictating that a person going to jail is justice or a person paying up is justice. This is again a very carceral, very capitalistic understanding of justice, and possibly doesn't fulfill what a survivor and a victim wants out of the process.
Okay. So that absolutely is extremely in vein of what we're going to be talking today. I actually really want to mention this quote because there is this idea. It's a Bell Hooks quote. So fear is a primary force upholding structures of domination. It promotes the desire for separation, the desire not to be known. When we are taught that safety lies always with sameness, then difference of any kind will appear as a threat. And so when we talk about the concept of sameness in our society, we're actually only specifically talking about something that is very heteronormative, that is very Brahmanical, that is very capitalist in that idea. It is basically the homogenous idea of what a society is to look like. So that's one of the reasons why our justice system is not accommodating towards people of marginalized communities, Dalit women, tribal women, Adivasi women. So that's what. So when most people, when they think about justice, they don't know how to think about that, and nor do they want to, because it threatens the very structures in place. Because that would require a radical overhaul of all structures in place, and that is just too inconvenient. So, Jagisha, can you talk to us a little bit about that fact? The fact that our state or our country is so hostile to the idea of, yeah. So even like when it comes to like caste-based reparations or systems in place, they think of that as a privilege rather than actual form of accommodation to certain identities that exist within this nation. So can you talk a little bit about that, and how can we relate that to sexual violence?
Because what I think we have this privilege. We are upper caste, so we have been denying that there is a caste based violence happens. So we have been denying for more than 100 years. So firstly, we have to accept that there is thing a caste based violence, because a Dalit woman face 3 layer of oppression by a Dalit man, by a upper caste man, and by a upper caste woman. So she faced 3 layer of oppression. So we have to discuss about this more and more. And secondly, we actually normalize the violence, because in Bollywood movies, when Kabir Singh came, so what the director said, if you can't hit her, or so you can't love her. So I have also faced physical or psychological violence. So my mother used to say, he loves you, but I question my mother. So why he hits me? Because he wants to discipline you. So man wants to discipline us, like we have to behave in a certain way. So they try to discipline us. So in caste-based violence, same thing happened. Upper caste men try to challenge their like like challenge their domination, or yeah.
Assert their domination. Yeah. No, please continue. Please continue.
Yeah. So is firstly we have to acknowledge that the privilege of an upper caste woman or upper caste man, and we have to accept that there is a caste based violence. We have been denying. The denying is the real problem, according to me.
And anyone else can jump in as well. You can contribute and just keep adding on. Please go ahead. Mahima, let me just help you out. I don't want to point people on the spot. That's why.
No, I think because of technology, it's better to like wait for 10 seconds
Right.
and get the person to speak first. Yeah, just to yeah. So, adding on to what Jagisha said, I mean, so I was writing it was one of the part of my research that I was researching the position of African American women in America and Dalit women in India. I mean, this is when this was the height of apartheid, and like almost a century ago, and Dalit women today. But one of the things that I found out in my research is that the kind of transition that has happened due to film industry or due to the Bollywood industry, it's been so different. I mean, I'm sure Varuna can add a lot to it, because we've sort of like sexualized the identity. I mean, there's Rihanna, there's Beyonce, and we sexualize and we admire the kind of how do I say, the years of oppression that the community has been through, and then we use it positively to sexualize them. But that's what the industry has done. But the same has not happened for Dalit women in India. I mean, how many women can the audience tell me who have actively identified themselves as Dalit women and been in the film industry and earned as much as Beyonce or Rihanna? So I mean, I also think that we should not look at systems in isolation. We must look at the cultural and the transnational aspects of cultures and the kind of oppression that women have faced intercontinentally and in different systems as well, and use that as a paradigm to start the dialogue on corrective action.
Yeah, there's actually, there has been international solidarity between, Dalit folks and the African American movement, especially they were called the Black Panther Party, and that's one of the reasons why we had like the Dalit Panthers in India as well. And so we have that kind of transnational kind of solidarity that exists, and that is fantastic. But yeah, Varna, talk to us a little bit more about how, we see those systems that exist, and you see that when we think about like structures of oppression, we're not just talking like capitalism and patriarchy or imperialism, we're also talking about the fact that, at least with Dalit women, it actually comes down to also another variation of anti-Blackness as well. And that compounds the sexual violence against Dalit women in India. So can we talk about that connection here, like in the American context and the Indian context?
Yeah, of course, I'm no expert on this. And I also, as someone who's upper caste, who's born into a Brahmin family, I, to some extent, feel very uncomfortable talking on behalf of Dalit feminists.
Yeah.
But I will, to some extent, try to, from what I've read from Isabel Wilkerson and her book From Caste and Its Discontents, I think that, of course, India has a very long way to go. In my mind, it feels like 1947 was not that long ago. Right. And everyone, I think even myself, were taught that caste was sort of put in place by the British. And it's as if we have completely lived in this world where we don't want to talk about it. And it's just a few people who had the privilege of education, who have access to the internet. And there's a lot of organizing that goes on over the internet. Right. But I don't think that we get to see a whole layer. This is again all from the reading that I've done through feminist books, is that I think that feminism has always often been for the privileged, and it has been for people, especially women who come from higher class backgrounds, right? And it's never been, and it's always been under the guise of some guy or some patriarchal structure sort of being finally like, oh, I think it's now your turn to talk, or sort of like passing the torch. And from that comes sort of the upper caste feminists sort of taking center stage. I think the real movement, and I'm waiting to see it, and I think it's sort of taking on form in social media. And of course, I think Shruti or Jagisha or Mahima can talk about this to some extent more. That I really think it does start from smaller communities. Like it should start, the organizing should start from there. But I want to say that here there is still, I mean, in the US, there's still a lot of contention. Like recently, politicians got really upset over wet ass pussy. I'm just going to say it because I'm not going to censor it. They were like, how can a woman be so sexual? And so I think to an extent, from most of the things that I write about, Black women still have a lot of sexual stereotypes. I still don't want to talk on behalf of them, like the Jezebel stereotype. We know that they are more likely to be denied contraception. They're more likely to be forced to use contraception because they're seen as hypersexual beings. There's a level of mistrust between Black folks and the systems here. And I think to some extent, that's probably the same in India. I don't know if anyone else can talk about that distrust that's there because the community and systems have perpetuated it, right? So I don't know what, maybe Shruti can talk more about this, of course.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask like Shruti that question because, because there's obviously a massive distrust of the systems in place or the judicial system in place, or even just going down to like the nearby cop station, if you want to have any access to justice, or even just file a simple FIR, and that just won't happen. It doesn't go down that well. But my question is that I wonder, is it okay to, it's not that it's okay, is it useful at this point to continue to rely on the state machinery to try and form justice rather than focusing on within our communities? That's one of the reasons we try to draw those parallels with abolitionist justice, where they essentially say that they don't trust cops, they don't trust the judicial system at all. They're going to start with their communities, start organizing with their communities, and start to try and find ways to restore justice within their communities and hold communities accountable there. What do you reckon? Do you think that is possible in our country, or is that too soon to even expect?
I think those are two different questions. I definitely think that it's possible, but yeah, it's going to take a long time. So again, I think I'm going to be the person who's going to strip it down and bring it to like a micro focus. Yeah, because I feel if collective action is what we're speaking about, then we have to look at whose voices are going to be centered here. And are they going to have the platform and the freedom and the agency to speak for themselves instead of, somebody else serving as a megaphone for them? And if it is about sexual violence that we're speaking about of women and other non-male genders, then we have to remember, like what Vidisha also said, how are we raising these persons? If we are infantilizing them beyond a point, if we are constantly giving them the worst imaginable understanding of love, relationships, intimacy, of care and concern, if we are raising them as persons who have to bear the weight of shame and honor, if we are raising them as persons whose silence is valued more than their openness and their brazenness and their demand and their protests, then this collective action is going to fundamentally fail, because the persons who can come together and form the collective action are not prepared for it, are not ready for it. So it is a process that has to really, really start at the base, where women and non-male genders are able to speak up, not be shunned, not be shamed, not be victim blamed, not be slut shamed, not be called names, not have people dig through their histories and doubt the veracity of their stories. We have to create that environment. And I feel that's where people like us with caste privilege, with class privilege, with privilege of education, language, what have you, we help create that environment where these voices can come up and speak. Because I feel that we can have a lot of larger conversations where we conceptualize, look at theories, and we look at success stories. But these success stories have worked for decades, possibly for centuries, before they came together and became effective. Be it indigenous communities, Black communities, even there, within these communities also women are trying to form their own parallel strains because they still feel they're not heard. They still feel the stage is not for them. They still feel that they have to, raise their voice to be remembered, that they are not an afterthought at a panel or at a stage presentation. So I feel that women's movements specifically, and queer movements and movements led by other genders, they are constantly forced to have these parallel consciousness going with the mainstream, because they are constantly feeling like they're afterthoughts. They're constantly feeling like totems. They're constantly feeling like they're the tokens in a panel with like 16 men. And then there is me, which gives them an automatic stamp of being representative. Yeah. So we have to question representation. We have to question action, what this action means. And we have to question, if it is collective, then how truly intersectional it is. Who is leading the voices? Are we really, because we are feminists and we are talking about building feminist movements, are we questioning power dynamics? Are we doling out power? Are we still passing the mic? But why do we have the mic in the first place? So we have to question these things, because unless we do, I feel that it is a variant of the heteronormative patriarchal system again. Maybe it's whittled down, maybe it's less so, but it is still that. Because again, the power is concentrated. Again, some like a few people are setting the standard of what is right or wrong, what is moral and immoral, and what is justice and not justice. Because then again, the collectivism of it fails. I always say, and in the past few years, I've come across the terms intersectional, collective, collectivism a lot. What I constantly say is it is far, far, far easier to spout these words and very, very, very tough to apply them in practice and build structures and methodologies out of it. It is very, very difficult to be intersectional in practice. It's very, very difficult to be a true collective. And it is very, very difficult to be anti-caste if you are not willing to listen to Dalit feminists, if you're not willing to listen to tribal feminists, if you are getting hurt by their criticism, then you still are wanting to preserve your privilege while also getting like a badge of honor that you are anti-caste. So panels like this, stages like this, if you do not have Dalit feminists, if you do not have feminists who are not upper caste, then that there itself is a failure. Because at every forum, at every space, there needs to be that voice. There needs to be queer voices. There needs to be voices of persons with disability. There needs to be indigenous voices, because they have to be present at every phase. Otherwise, again, it is a very tokenistic thing to do to bring them in. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking a little more than I should have, but I just want to also say one very important thing, and that I face with a lot of GBV survivors, also faced it myself. There is this, which is attached to the patriarchal structure, there is this concept of the ideal victim. And when it comes to violence, especially sexual violence, there is always the ideal victim syndrome, which it is all over the place, especially in the media. So if I am, as Varuna said, a wet ass pussy sort of person who has been very open, don't give a damn, have been very open about my sexual history, then me having faced sexual violence and then coming out with it automatically makes me an imperfect victim who does not deserve social understanding or empathy or sympathy or possibly even justice, because I had it coming. I was asking for it. So unless we break the shackles of how we look at victims and who are we to define who a victim should be, how she should react, should she cry, should she have marks on her body, should she be apologetic about her sexual history, should she also be presenting a very sushil, a very sanskari demeanor, and if that is absent, does that affect her access to justice, be whatever form, be it either the court, the carceral room, or anything else? And I want to give you an example, because when we approached the police station, and that was for support for my mother, and I went the first day, it was difficult enough to get a hearing from someone there. The second day, and I'm telling you this because of the grotesque almost strategy that you have to apply to be heard in a freaking police station. So I was sitting in my room and I'm like, okay, this is going to be one more difficult day. I have to state and restate and push for the cause and tell them that violence is wrong. And then I saw I had a huge bruise on my arm then, and I tend to usually wear like a 3/4 sleeve thing. But that day I decided that, okay, I'm going to wear a shorter sleeve thing, and I'm going to just, have the policeman, his eyes sort of fall on the scar, on the mark, and possibly have him question it. And he did, and he in fact asked me, is that a tattoo? So I'm like, no, that's not a tattoo. That's a very fresh bruise, because I've been hit. And then it changed. Of course, the fact that I was sitting there is a factor of my class and my caste, and how I was presenting and how I was looking at me. But till the first day, he was still dilly-dallying. He was not okay by the fact that a family had come in and was going against the father. He wanted to position it as a thing that the children are sort of wanting to separate the parents. But the moment he saw the bruise, his idea of what had gone on suddenly sort of dawned on him. And that is a problem. What if I don't have marks on my body? Am I not a credible victim? So we have to question how we look at victims and survivors as well.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, I just want to jump in.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Shruti, I'm literally 100%. Like, I'm just like, yes, please preach. This exactly what you said. I think I think one of the main problems that we face, especially in a culture of dominance, is saying that it's not just physical abuse, it is psychological abuse and it is emotional abuse. Women carry this and other non-men persons carry this every single day. Living in these systems is so traumatic, and you're carrying that chronic trauma in your body. Not having access to pleasure, not having access to your own sexuality is so traumatizing. I was also looking at some of the laws, and I think that, when you read the news stories, it's always like a WTF moment, right? Because you're just, like recently in rural areas with local magistrates. I'll come to that. But I think there's this whole idea that a woman is this pure structure that should not be violated, who we should respect her dignity. Like even when they say Mother India, or when they refer to like it's a she, the girl child, and it's viewed as this insanely infantilized Puritan, Mother Mary structure, that she cannot be violated. You cannot take her honor away from her, and all the men will walk around with sticks and protect her dignity, will protect her honor. I mean, even looking at the law, I just pulled up one that says the committee has broadened the definition of rape by amending the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, in which crime outraging the modesty and dignity of women are included. What is modesty and dignity? Those words are so connected with, a woman's and other non-men person's vagina. But if you are autonomous and you are exercising your own sexual rights, they're like, you've already violated it. You've already opened that gate. It's already up for sale. So don't come into our police station and pretend like, But then what about other women who literally, like our Hathras case, who is just in a field, right? And I saw this other movie which again was told by another white woman, where she said child marriage. This girl, they are afraid, so they get the girl married at 11, so that if she gets kidnapped while she's working in the fields and gets raped, then there's no dishonor on the family. It's never that we need to question these structures. Like local magistrates. I read this news piece the other day where they said the local magistrate forces victims to marry the perpetrators or the persons who deflowered her, so the dignity will not be lost, because no one would want to marry a non-virgin. Like, I so agree with this ideology of like, who is the perfect victim? Like, what about women who are carried through psychological? What about sexual coercion? No one talks about that. Women, half of us have lost our virginity because the guy has talked us into it. Oh, trust me, it's gonna hurt, but it's gonna be fine. Every girl has to do it.
Yeah, which is not true. So it riles me up, because most of it's also another thing where it's actually sexually appealing for men because they can't find it, thing if it's not painful for the woman. And I'm just baffled at how.
Or even if you go, like, even if you watch porn, like, I feel like I had to watch porn to even know what intercourse looked like, because I didn't get that talk in school. And so my ideas are of men, these big burly men dominating really petite women. And there is an entire section for teens, right? And we know that there's a big percentage of women, girls who are trafficked less than the ages of 18. But these areas are all like fetishized, right? People, like guys come, they're like, I'm going to go to Sonagachi, I'm going to go to, another red light district. I tried to talk in Chennai, when I was studying in Chennai, I tried to talk to a sex worker. I just wanted to go and talk to her. A pimp chased me down the street and said, I'm going to take you to the cops for talking to a sex worker. I was like, this is a woman with dignity, first of all. right? She was probably coerced into this by a family member or for the lack of money. And there is so much of negativity being spewed around her, and this idea that the pimp needs to protect her. Don't even get me started. Like, and of course, those are all like bigger issues, like of course where they say that this is the perfect victim. So if she was, suppose she, and we know that sex workers are more prone to violence, so what happens if a sex worker goes in to, you know, to the cops? There's so much of distrust around her story. No one wants to believe her. She carries those scars with her, of course. But even like in school, right? Like I was looking out the window and I see this guy like looking at me in the eye and like jacking off. Unsolicited dick pics that I think all of us on this panel, I can easily say, have gotten unsolicited dick pics. No one wants to see that ever, right?
And just imagine if you're a queer person and
Yes.
your idea of sex is only penis and vagina, and you don't even know what the hell it's supposed to be like otherwise, and that adds to the confusion. You don't know consent. You think that
Nope.
sex is this, and also orgasm is also one party orgasm. Pleasure, the idea of pleasure, it ends with ejaculation, and then of course even the idea of virginity, which is perpetuated and is connected to the honor thing that you spoke about. Like, there is no space for us to explore anything. You know, there is no space for us to tack on our own definitions based on our own expectations and experiences. And I feel very, I feel very sad for our generation that we are getting so much sex education from porn, which are, there is nothing wrong in the idea of porn itself, but the way the industry has grown and all the problematic aspects that the branches it has makes it extremely yeah, it's traumatizing. You don't know how much consent women have. In fact, even the most popular and most, in our eyes, powerful adult stars don't have control and have complained
They
about
don't.
sexual assault on the set. And also there too, the women are so infantilized, the way their bodies are. There is no body diversity there. There is no queer diversity there. There are corners there we have to go. So just when we are talking about dominance and domination and sexual violence, um, even starting at sex, how much do we know? And how much space do we have to even acquire our own information in that respect?
Yeah, I think it's because, you know, it has to do with that. First of all, we don't talk about consent. Second of all, we've kind of put women in this kind of very strange prude hole dichotomy, right? And we've basically put them on a pedestal, or if they're not on that pedestal, they're less than dirt, which is one of the reasons why we're not able to see women as complex human beings, as women, as people who have, we're not perfect. And of course we can't be perfect. It's impossible to be perfect. And it's dehumanizing to expect women to be perfect. But that is also that is also why the conversation about being an ideal, like the perfect, you can't be a perfect victim. You have to have so and so bruises. You have to have so and so story. And that's one of the things that, because I used to, when I was watching the whole Me Too thing happen, Me Too, all the conversations that were happening around Me Too, I saw was that only if they had credible stories was those stories allowed to, you know, take up public space. Or else, if you're an imperfect victim, or if you were someone who, you know, had a past sexual history, you were still treated with some level of suspicion, and those stories just kept coming through. And that's also another thing that I see with, you know, at least in India, I see that happen with people who come from specifically marginalized communities like Dalit folks, and for example. And just like you were saying, Shruti, like who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, right? And when we correlate that kind of sexual violence with people who do come from these specific communities, who gets to talk, who gets to be listened to? Are laws in place listening to the grievances of those who come from those communities? And I see that concept, you know, like the concept of free speech to me has always been quite interesting, because I noticed that anyone who speaks out against injustice against them is seen as so-called canceling. But anyone who puts out ideas who are literally fascist in nature, that is just straight up free speech. That should just be allowed. We need to exercise all of our ways to say horrifying things. And somehow it's always, anyone who's trying to push back against, social injustices, their words get censored. And that's what we saw recently with the Hathras case, right? We saw Dalit folks saying that this is a caste-based atrocity. This is a caste-based sexualized violence against a Dalit woman, and almost everyone started screeching about how it's not caste-based. Don't make it about caste. And we see those parallels in American communities where it's actually not a racial thing, or the same thing when I saw it in Australia, don't make it an indigenous issue. And so I would see all of these parallels, and it's the same thing happening here. And yet we're not able to. I'm kind of trying to figure out, how do we start with those conversations when we're talking about in culture of dominance? And India is a very, not just patriarchal, but it's very much based on that hierarchy of dominance. They love that idea. They cannot seem to. Yeah, please go ahead, Jagisha. Please add.
At one line, the real problem lies in our religious scriptures. So according to Manusmriti or Bible or any other Quran, so the violence is justified in those scriptures. So in Manusmriti also, there are numbers of shloks which written by men, or जिसने भी जो ये लिखा है कि woman is to be protected, just violence is justified by men, if he want to discipline a woman, so he can hit her. So violence is justified in our religious scriptures. And also when people in India deny caste because it's in their religion, they are following the religion, Hindu religion. So they're never going to acknowledge there is a problem in their religion, the caste system, the caste hierarchy.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the most, scary parts, because they feel that if you bring about the question of caste, you would have to bring about the elimination of that very religious scripture. That was a very scary thought, considering that religious scripture is so much a part of the social fabric of India, and to threaten that very social fabric is terrifying. And it almost feels like, you see democracy go up in flames just to protect it. So Mahima, do you have anything to say about this? What are your observances from this perspective?
I actually agree with the three of them. So even while Shruti was talking, and Jagisha and Varuna were talking, I was thinking about the standpoint perspective. Standpoint perspective is basically when you tell the person from the marginalized community that their opinion is coming from their experiences, and that is what gives validation to it. It basically also started when there was this whole academic debate around, what is your rationalization, where you're coming from. If you're giving a perspective in a gathering, or if you're giving a perspective in, let's say, a forum like this, the standpoint stands valid because you've experienced it. But at the same time, even the way academic chapters were framed, or academic discussions were framed, people from upper caste backgrounds, including myself, I've done this, I will actively say that before I was equipped with liberal arts knowledge, I've actively done this in my entire life, that I've told people from lower caste backgrounds that, why can't I speak for your rights? I feel for you, and why cannot I do it? And it literally took me so much of academic knowledge and sitting down with people from various backgrounds and telling them that why should I give a reason, not even giving a reason, why should their voice be heard much more than mine would be on a topic that is related to them. And it's something that we actively process every single day. I mean, even any sort of a discussion that we have, it's always better if somebody's talking from experience, but at the same time, what happens to those who don't want to talk about it? That's something I was just thinking about in the entire discussion.
Yeah, sorry, who was saying?
You also heard of the word tone shaming. If a woman or a Dalit woman speaks aggressively, so people were saying why are you aggressive? So I've heard one line, we don't want revenge, we want equality. So you should deal with this. Like we want equality, so we had the right to be aggressive because we have been oppressed for centuries. So don't question Dalit woman or a woman or a Dalit man because they have been oppressed for centuries. So they have the right to be aggressive.
Yeah, I think there's always that kind of I like to call it concern trolling, because it's this kind of idea like, oh, this person is sounding too angry. I'm too concerned that this person is not being rational enough. And I'm sitting there, we have to go like, our systems, our social culture is not rational at all, which requires almost an aggressive and rigorous response, because we are dealing with an excessively unfair, irrational system that has no interest whatsoever in reforming itself, let alone, in any way restructuring itself. So, like, Shruti, can you talk to us a little bit more about, the fact that we are dealing, so you said that, collective action is hard, and I absolutely agree. Organizing, when I used to be a part of organizing activist circles, it requires God tier level of patience. That's what I found. But then I also realized that, it's not that it's impossible. It's just that transforming attitudes is really hard. How do we start in a country like, in a country like India that is so, it's really afraid to move out of its comfort zone. And I'm wondering, how do we begin? Like, how do we start with our communities? Even, of course, we've discussed the fact that we need to talk about it at home, like, restructure how the family unit looks like, even considering the family unit is extremely, heterosexist, very, very patriarchal, man, woman, child. So how do we restructure that in, when we try to create, like, especially as queer folks, we know that, families can look like anyone. We can select our own family, create our own families. How do we bring those dynamics into our real world structures? Or just our communities? How do we start?
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, but how do we start?
I think we have to start at taking a step back, especially if you are the privileged folk. And I want to bring this up again and again, especially when we are talking about, in today's environment in India, we're talking about sexual violence. It's very, very important that any project we take on, any activity we take on, even a Facebook page we start, do not have a navel-gazing sort of approach to it. You have to step back and you have to see, okay, if I'm touting words like collective action, if I'm talking about intersectionality, inclusion, diversity, what have you, have I made true efforts in those directions or not? So I think there is a big gap between intention and action. Intentions are great, but intentions are only the first step to what you're doing. So you could have intended to create an environment or a platform which is supposed to be diverse, but in effect, in reality, it isn't. So even this platform, we are in an environment in this particular panel also. Why are some women not here? Why are certain types of representation not here? Because it is not our space as UC feminists to speak for Dalit women, to speak for Adivasi women, to speak for tribal women. They are perfectly capable of doing that themselves. And of course, they have every right to do it. Because here we are talking about how do we start, how to realize this. They have the answers. It's our frustration with the heteronormative system itself, which is like, oh, women are such enigmatic beings and we do not understand what they want. And that is, we know, is bunkum. And it is bunkum because they are not listening to us. So if we as UC feminists and purported intersectional feminists not creating platforms where different voices are included, we are failing at the first step, which is to put intent into action. So intent into action can come only when you are willing to take a step back. We are talking about caste, we're talking about heteronormativity. We have to understand that even there, if our intention or our interest is in dictating terms, in dictating in what direction it should take, what form it should take, then it is not what we are claiming it to be. So I guess that's where we need to start. Because indigenous communities, Black communities, Dalit communities, Indian communities in general, um, as Jagisha said, the fight is intergenerational, the fight is ongoing. The fight also has been dismissed and denied and almost normalized for centuries, for generations. So these are communities whose core is collective action. Their core has been community action. Their core has been fed by mobilization. So the fact that we are confused and we don't know where to start, it's because we are again not listening to communities for whom collective action is the way to be. We are queer persons. Queer persons have always relied on their communities to act because okay, now we are in lockdown and a lot of hetero folks have also been forced into lockdown. But the truth is, LGBTQI persons, a lot of them have been in lockdown for centuries because they have not been able to come out. Their mobility is compromised. They can't present themselves as they want to be. They can't hold their partner's hand on the roads. So they have been in lockdown. So a lot of concepts that we are understanding now have always existed. It's just that the communities for whom it's a reality, they're on the fringes of our understanding. So collective action is existing, is active, and it's active in communities who possibly whose voices are not getting amplified, whose voices are not getting included. So I think that's where the first step we can take. We have to listen. We have to be willing to question our privilege, not just stop at questioning our privilege. Also learn how to forego that privilege to create a space where there can possibly be a more equitable space. We can't just say, oh, I know I'm UC and I don't understand it and I'm confused or something of that sort. What are you doing for it? What are you doing about it? Because that action is what it's going to lead to. But aside from that, I always believe if your commitment is to intersectionality, um, self-identification, creating platforms and creating spaces or having a demeanor where you are not assuming, be it pronouns or be it anything else, that is at the core of building a respectful system. Because here, that is where you break the tokenistic aspect of representation, because you have not assumed that, okay, I'm bringing in this person because this person looks a certain way. You're bringing in that person because that person self-identifies in a way and has every right to have representation in the movement. So unless we break these shackles in our heads also, which is also a first step. How do we break these shackles in our head? How do we reimagine marriage? How do we reimagine family? How do we reimagine sex? Because we're talking about sexual violence. Is violence only physical in your head? If it's so, why? Why is violence only physical in your head? You have, in all probability, faced non-physical violence all your life. Why isn't that acknowledged? And this level of breaking of barriers, breaking of our conditioning is also, I feel, the first step, because that is going to feed your action. And I'm hoping everything, social media and anything that you take on, is only a doorway into a larger understanding of movements, on movement building, and also is leading to action. And it's not just about, oh, I tried, but whatever, nothing came out of it. So I'm hoping that all collective effort, action, understanding, and discussion is about, okay, in the end, this is what we are going to do.
Did anyone have any other things that they would like to comment, just to add on to Shruti's words? Because we are kind of slowly running out of time. So I just want to see if there's anyone who wants to say anything or just add on to Shruti's words.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there has to be like, we have to also hold our media structures accountable, like not just people who are in charge of social media, but I think that to a big extent, the representations that we see on screen are very much conditional, right? So there's like pink washing where it's only an acceptable UC queer, like, male gay couple that we see, and even that is sort of like there's jokes around it, like in Dostana, which
And
like
cis people, mostly cis people.
Yeah,
and
mostly.
mostly cis people, right? Like, and lesbian women are fetishized. The whole ideology of there's too much bisexual erasure. There's biphobia, right? And I think that we get that from watching movies, like even colorism with that recent song where they said that Beyonce would be ashamed by looking at your color. There's anti-blackness that's been perpetuated on a daily basis. There's colorism that we see in movies. I watched a movie last night that I wanted to show my husband who's white. And I was so ashamed to watch that movie because I was literally just cringing at every single moment of how much screen time these male cis actors have and how they are openly patriotic, they are openly nationalistic, they're openly Brahmin, they're openly trying to protect the women. This guy didn't ask consent and he just kissed her. And we've seen so many examples of this where they normalize this when we watch it, right? And so I think a big extent is holding these media accountable, even our like news TV shows, like not just bringing someone on as a token, but really trying to center their opinion and trying to have them. And like Shruti has been saying, they have been organizing from day one. Like that's their lives. Here we're having an intellectual conversation, but really the norm has to shift. There have to be we have to work towards. Also, because India has how many cell phones? I don't even know. Like, I feel like internet is growing, like the economy is growing. And what is the information that people are reading? Like, what is the information that they are reading? If they are only seeing nationalistic agendas, if they are only seeing cis heteronormative agendas, then they're going to grow up with that. They're going to teach their children that. They're going to work towards perpetuating those structures. So I again, like I feel like even though we have social media structures, we have panels like this on YouTube, we have a responsibility to be as intersectional and as diverse as possible. And I agree with Shruti that, you know, I feel very uncomfortable talking on behalf of Dalit feminists, and it would be nice that in the next panel, if we had more Dalit and queer and disabled folks and even body positive folks on the space as well.
Jatisha, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I also want to add one thing. My story is like the same. I was thrown out of my home when my parents find out that my husband is a Dalit. So it's a real problem. In 2020 also, we are not seeing more intercaste marriages. So there's still a way to go to reach equality, and yeah, I just want to add my story.
Yeah, absolutely. Mahima?
Yeah, so sort of summing up all of everything that has been discussed and adding my 2 cents would be that we also need to look at where the power is coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times, there's so much of interdependence. Even when you look at sexual violence and it's something that people say, "Ghar se bahar nikal dunga." There's so much of fear associated with living alone and fending for yourself. So there's a lot of economic power and economic capital associated with violence, I think, in the first place. And creating alternative channels of sustenance for women. Like how about setting up a fund in the RWAs for women who face domestic violence at home? Because ultimately, if a woman is facing something at home, the next point of contact, the first person she'll want to reach out should be a neighbor. There's a whole campaign that was launched by Breakthrough that said that Ghanti Bajao campaign. It was just about, ringing the bell if you hear voices or screaming in the household. Just being a good, informed neighbor. So I think there should be more discussion about how economic capital transcends into cultural capital and social capital, and keep setting up relief funds for victims and making sure they actually get there. And starting this at the grassroots level so people have more agency to get access to them in the first place.
Absolutely. Because I think when we think abusers who wield their power over less powerful groups, it's basically a reassertion of their own power, right? It also informs this sense of hierarchy, especially of their masculinity, usually of, domestic, like when we talk about, sexual abusers or domestic abusers, it's usually about maintaining their sense of power and control within that space. And this translates so widely into not just within our homes, not just in the private sphere, but also in the public sphere and within the state, within any kind of structure. Even like in school, how we have educators asserting power over children, and it's almost like a constant infantilizing process, and sexual violence is really at the heart of that, right? Like this constant infantilization of women, of their agency, no agency whatsoever. We have no idea what they want. We don't care about what they want. At least that's what power. At least that's where the sense of power comes from. And so we're trying to constantly challenge that sense of power and that control and that abuse, and it starts from places who are already having those discussions, especially like Shruti said, you know, people are having these discussions, Dalit folks are having these discussions. And I think one of the reasons why I bring up Dalit folks is because we as Savarna women, we as upper caste women, I think we have this kind of thing where we're so scared of questioning the fact that we are part of that system, right? We are, because that would almost make it seem like actually we are privileged, and we don't want to acknowledge that we have that privilege because we still want to be seen as people who are oppressed, right? We still have that little bit of marginalization as well. So we don't want to, it seems like we're overriding that. And I think that anxiety, that tension needs to be interrogated. Just like how, you know, we tell white folks, like, white folks, why don't you talk to our white folks about racism or the fact about white supremacy? And the same thing is a conversation that I want to, at least within this, not just within this panel, it's just about how we have to reckon with ourselves, with the fact that we are also part of that very system that we are trying to dismantle. And so it's really hard because we are going to try, as like Shruti said, we have to forego those privileges that come with us. So yeah, we're just gonna take up some questions. Let me just see where the questions are. There we go. Right, just trying to figure out where the questions are. I'm sorry, are you able to hear me? Apparently my voice is breaking up, at least according to the comments.
There's a little bit of disturbance around your voice.
I do apologize. I'm not sure why that is happening, but there was a person who said that WAP wasn't so bad. I thought it was great. But yeah, if there were any questions in the comments, that would be absolutely fantastic. Just trying to see. So Harshvin Kaur Gandhi asks, like, how can we begin the difficult conversations of recognizing dominance in our houses? How do we start with that question? Like, how do we tackle the fact that domination is a part of our struggles? And at least when you talk about, so within Sakshi, we talk about child sexual abuse all the time. Now, one of the main issues that many folks face is that they don't know how to even begin to talk about violence within their homes or the issue of domination. They don't know how to challenge those structures. So how do we even have that very difficult conversation within the household?
Yeah, one of the things, sorry, I just like jumped in because so one of the things that I started doing was I started like collectively organizing within my own family. So I would talk to my cousins, and I would talk to my aunts, and then I would talk to my mom, and I would bring up certain things, and I'd be like, you know, Dad did this thing today, and it seems a little, yeah, I don't think that's okay. What do you think? And sort of like work together. And so I started slowly having conversations with my aunts and with my mom and with my cousins, and sort of we banded together. So what we did was we collectively would go to and have, you know, nighttime conversations. Like, you know, whether it's a dinner conversation, or my mom would go tell my dad and she would say, you kind of said this thing today that was inappropriate, and I'm not sure if you want to continue saying those things, right? But again, I come from a liberal family where there is some idea of change, some idea of like, and also the communities that we grow up in, also you want to be seen as liberal, you want to be seen as that they see folks who went abroad, who go to US and want to be white adjacent. And so there's this like pseudo-feminism or pseudo-liberalism that sort of happens. I still deal with that on a daily basis. I'm not sure what it looks like when it's, again, like what Mahima said, where you have like your body at home, you also have a cultural body. And so when you bring it up with the male, but there's this male tribe sort of, you know, in their own community where they're all, and even the women are part of that group where they're all constantly policing the woman. Of course, I'd love to hear what anyone else has to say about that form of dominance. But for me, I found like dinner table conversations and banding up with the women in my family to sort of question works.
Did anyone have any particular ideas about that question?
For me, I think if you cannot find a space where people would listen or would want to have a conversation about it,
Yes.
then find the next person who can. I mean, and then organize, again, what Ambedkar said, educate, organize, agitate. I mean, that is a very good approach to take to approach any kind of dominance, I feel. I mean, if I know that I cannot maybe talk to my father about it or talk to my mother about it, the first thing I will probably do is talk to my brother about it and hear his thoughts. Exactly what Varuna did. It's a terrific approach, in fact. And then hearing his thoughts, we would collaboratively work towards talking to our parents. This is something that we felt very uncomfortable about. And I also think that not just dominance, I mean, any sort of a conversation. So, in 11th and 12th, when I wanted to take up humanities and I decided I wanted to maybe do gender, the first thing my mother ever told me was, "Ye feminist type ke ghar nahi bachte, so mat le." And it was such a, and now when I think about it, it's been such a problematic statement that, like, just because I'm actively speaking about dominance and patriarchy and all of these things, somebody's telling me that they'll kick me out of the social system. And that's coming from my first point of contact, my first socialization agent with my mother. And I'm also from a very, very liberal family. My mother, how do I say it? It's as liberal as it gets. But then yet, and why just domination? I mean, you should talk about everything under the sun with your parents, because that's where socialization starts.
Shruti, what about you? Yeah, please.
You're on mute.
Oh,
sorry. I especially want to jump in because I'm not from a liberal family and I want to be really assertive. And I'm in fact from a family which is like one of the most tragic, which has a facade of being very not Brady Bunchy, but somewhere close. Like, oh, the kids are doing well, and the father has a job. They live in a big bungalow or have a flat, and blah blah blah. I'm saying it as a joke now, but because I've gone through years of healing and recovery and therapy and medicine and all of that. But the truth is that is the reality of a GBV survivor. They are cloistered. So when we are talking about abuse, we are talking about sexual violence or any sort of abuse. Their connection to reality is dictated mostly by the abuser. So in all probability, they are isolated because isolation is a very, very strong factor in the way abuse functions, in the way abusers function. So you have to realize when we are talking about questioning dominance, we all respect to Mahima and Varuna, but talking about it is a very privileged stance to take, because if it's a victim or a survivor who has no exposure to the outside world, is probably not even aware of the first step of what rights they can assert, and also has been raised in an ecosystem where saving the information about the shame of the family is on her, then she's not going to speak up. A victim, and I know that a lot of persons don't like the word victim, but I find it to be a very important word, because I do not think that I would be here today if I did not even realize I'm a victim. My action, my pushback began when I realized I'm a victim. So if you are talking about questioning dominance, how can the person first realize that they are going through abuse in the first place? And if they're isolated, if they do not have connections with any person who can maybe bring that to their realization, then how is that questioning even going to begin? If I can give a personal example, in my house, my mother was the primary victim there. And for decades, there was, of course, the realization that this is a very shit life. This is a bad life. I don't want to live like this. But the nitty-gritty of what sort of abuse am I going through, and obviously the very, very end of the spectrum that I can escape this, it didn't exist. And it came in when I went out. I had college education and I came back in and I said, listen, I think we should start the process of stopping this. And only when I was sort of opening up certain doors is when this realization was taking hold. So if there is a victim or a survivor who doesn't have that out, doesn't have that any channel of exposure, then even coming to the realization that they are going through abuse is going to be near impossible. It is also a very traumatizing experience to recognize that I'm a victim, recognize that I have gone through abuse. Who wants that reality for themselves? So speaking up is, of course, a way to be, but getting to the point where they can speak up is extremely difficult and requires some channel of exposure. And as Varuna was talking about media can be one of them. Like for me, for my mom, the initial exposure to even like women speaking up was reading news reports. In fact, she read about the Gulabi Gang. She read about, she watched a few movies which had certain problematic aspects of feminism, but they were also about pushing back, about anger, about women expressing their anger. So just seeing that is a very powerful thing. And that is powerful because it is externalizing the abuse. It's not my mother who's the character. It's somebody else who's probably going through what she's going through, and she's taking action. So it doesn't re-traumatize her, but tells her what she can do.
Jagisha?
Yeah, so I come from a very orthodox and patriarchal family. So when my parents or my brother found out like I love this person from another caste, so they were like, say, how can you love a person from other caste? So I left my home, and there is no use of conversation. There's no use of conversation left because my family is very, very patriarchal and very, very orthodox. So I personally feel when I left my home, I started my new journey. So I started writing, I started speaking. When I was at my home, I was like I was suffocated. So I have faced physical abuse, I faced psychological abuse. But when I left my home, I was free. So today I can say I'm free. But that time I faced years of abuse from my brother, psychological abuse, physical violence. So in my case, I cannot say that the conversation can be happened. But in other home, I can say the new generation can start a conversation. The solution is for me the new generation can start a conversation.
I really relate to Shruti's story because I also come from a very conservative household, very queerphobic, everything, misogynist, name it. And honestly, because I also came from an extremely abusive household where I saw that strange hierarchy of power where my mother was both victim and abuser. And so I would see those kinds of things where, sometimes someone will like, let's talk within the family. And I'm like, I can't. I actually can't. I will probably be subjected to more violence if I try and perforate the issues about, sexual violence or domination within the home. And specifically, when it came to like any kind of sexual violence or domestic abuse, if I were to talk within any other household, they would straight up shun me. They would just be like, all right, she's talking about her personal issues. We don't want to hear it, and we don't want to be a part of it. And then when the cops were involved, they didn't want to hear about it. So it was just like straight up, there was no resources whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons why I think, the story for me was like a little bit more relatable, but because I had to basically tear my way into a space where I made it safe for me. And it's so hard for so many people who cannot have those conversations, especially if they don't have access to understanding whether they are actually a victim in a situation. Because most folks would be like, oh, domestic violence? Normal. It's absolutely normal within, our households. It's so normal. Why should we stop it? Of course, you probably deserve it. And so trying to go into these households and say like, actually, we need to talk about domination, not actually a thing that could backfire really badly. And in fact, it can cause more violence against the person who's being abused, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we say like, okay, a person who's trying to escape domestic violence is probably at their most that is probably the most dangerous time for them, because abusers might try and harm them or kill them. And so when we think about, a culture of domination, our systems are failing us everywhere, like within the home and outside the home. And so we have to really deal with the fact that, just having those conversations at home is not so much, it's almost, like Shruti said, it is almost merely a privilege at this point. You can't just do that, because that can get people reasonably killed. So that is.
And I'm personally very pained to hear that both of you went through so much. I'm not aware of my Varuna story, but the thing is, it's violence is so widespread. The fact that we have to fight so much in itself is so disheartening and demoralizing. Violence is everywhere. It is almost self-perpetuating at this point in so many families, because the cycles are repeating. The victims are becoming abusers as they form their own families, because they're unable to break the cycle, access therapy, what have you. So what I want to say is, anybody who's trying to break the cycle, unfortunately and painfully, it's a very lonely process. It's a very, very lonely journey most of the times.
Yeah. And it's just like, for me, one of those things that really bothers me and makes me deeply sad is that a person has to reveal their entire life story to be believed. They can't just be believed. No, we have to, and that's what, creates so much trauma porn. And there's literally a cottage industry. And that's one of the reasons why Me Too is going in that direction, where, you create a cottage industry of, people just revealing all of their traumas and traumatizing themselves over and over again. And it's just endless. And that's how much, people do not listen to people who come from violent backgrounds, who have such violence in their lives. And it's so disheartening that way. Sorry? Jigisha, please.
Like, I want to add one thing. Like, I'm still fighting to have a decent conversation with my parents, because my parents neglect my depression. They mocked my depression. So I have to live with those toxic relationships. So I want to add one more thing. Like, the idea of love in our society is very, very toxic.
Yes.
Very toxic. You have to accept other person. You have to agree with other person because you love him. You have to show them that you love him. So you have to accept each and every demand they want to So I have to live with the toxic, abusive relationships.
Yeah, and abuse is very so it's seen as synonymous with love in our society, which is really harmful and very dangerous as well. And that's one of the reasons why people stay in abusive relationships, because it's just seen like maybe this is their version of love. And I'm just sitting there going, oh, I don't think that's how this should be going. But that is also such a massive cultural phenomena. Sorry, I'm just seeing a comment over here. Sorry, I'm just reading this. I am worried when Dalit girls, along with upgrading to modernization, also pick a hidden and sugar-coated patriarchy. But although Dalit men too fall for this patriarchy, not all are Prashant Kanodia.
Prashant
is currently a political prisoner, and
he is my partner.
Yes. Oh, he's okay. I thought he was your husband. Okay. Yes. I'm still not quite sure what that comment meant. I'm sorry. I was just trying to understand what that comment meant. But yes, it's one of those things that it's not that easy to recognize dominance in our house. We will take one more question. It's another question that just says by Kalpana, what do the panelists think about why parents are so hesitant to talk about sex with their children? Does anyone want to just, the question's up on the screen. So if anyone wants to.
That's such an idea. Yeah, I mean. Sorry, go ahead, Mahima. No, please.
Just if in one sentence I have to give an answer, it would be because they have also been socialized with years and years of patriarchy. Um, and it's so they like even when I try to talk to my mother about sexual activity or try to talk to her about sex, she's always so apprehensive about talking her about her own experiences because of her socialization process. I mean, there's so much fear and shame associated with the sexual discussion. And I'm sure, like, if 20 years from now I become a mother, I will still be, let's say, if not 10%, at least 5% better equipped with that kind of knowledge than my mother was. So that
What
should
were
be one answer for me.
what were you about to say, Varna?
Yeah, no, I was about to say that it's because there's this idea of shame that they have grown up sensitized to, right? And again, it's outward influences like Shruti had said as well. If they're only watching and if they're only sensitized to media and their reading and their culture and the things that they see around them, they're not going to know what. So when I work in sexual education spaces in the Western world, they talk about kink, they talk about anal, they talk about queer sex. And for me, my fundamental question is, how can I even begin to talk about all of those things if a person cannot even view themselves as a sexual being, or if a woman cannot even look at herself as a sexual being, and if a man thinks that his duty is to assert power over a woman and carry on his lineage, which is so important, right? And hence the intersection of gender and caste and dominance, and sexuality. And so it really does start with, in my opinion, is education. Um, and our parents never received that education, right? They don't even want to talk about sex. They don't want to talk about periods. They don't want to talk about contraception. I had to lie to my parents and say that I was on contraception for my PCOS, when in fact, like, the only thing I could do was go and talk about it with my friends because the teachers wouldn't talk about it, and say, what are you all doing? Like, what's everybody doing? Like, where do I go buy a condom? And if you walk into a pharmacy, you're literally like stared down, or there are two men behind the counter who are commenting. You have to go tell your male friend, oh, can you please go buy me a condom? And they'll be like, why do you want to buy a condom? Who are you sleeping with tonight? And so there's this whole ideology of like shame, which is so traumatizing. Hence ideas of around masturbation, which is so beneficial, and orgasming, or even consent boundaries, etc. They don't want to talk about that because we're all so sensitized to it. Like, sometimes even I sometimes feel shame. Coming back to India, I even thought, I was like, should I even wear this on this panel? Should what would people think of me if I come here and I start talking about sex, right? But it's really just about breaking those molds. But I think my parents are never going to ever bring up those topics with me. And when they view it on screen, again, it's really warped ideologies of what sexuality is, right? Like, we can have an item number on screen, but we also watch movies like Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, where it's like this Puritan family structure where you have zero premarital sex and you only marry this one person, and then that's it, and you guys have sex one time and you get pregnant and you have a child, and then that's it. That's like a very linear. No one wants to talk about, oh, queer sex, or what if she's bi, or etc.
Oh, your voice. You've been muted somehow.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think there's definitely a lot of hesitation on their side because they're sensitized to it. Of course, my parents are like in their 50s, they are liberal, but they're still not going to come and talk to me about sex.
Yeah.
At all. And even their archaic views, when I got married to my husband, they were like, I think there was this awkwardness my mom had with me, and she's like, how was your first night? What did you guys do? And I was like, actually, we've been having sex for a really long time before we got married. Sorry for you to hear this from me right now, but it's happening. My dad refused to let me stay with my husband 6 days before my marriage. I didn't know how to tell him. I was like, we've kind of been sleeping in the same bed for a really long time. But he was so insistent that I not bring shame upon the family. But I think it's this, if we just conquer this ideology of shame and talk about where is the shame coming from and who is perpetuating this ideology of shame, Hopefully, I know that all of us here on this panel, and that's one of the things that we have to continue to do, is not just talk about sex education in like higher secondary schools or private schools. It's also talking about it in public schools. It's also talking about it in smaller communities. You know, English, not in English medium, but Hindi medium, Tamil medium, all of them, so on and so forth, so that we can translate it into every language and it's accessible to everyone, right? And so we can really talk about these concepts of like, sex is so natural and it's your birthright and you deserve to have safe sex and you deserve to feel sexual and you deserve to feel like to embrace your own sexuality. But our parents never got to do that, right? For them, like I think it was my parents, like, that's it. All they did was say, okay, we have to get pregnant because everyone's forcing us to get pregnant, and then we're done. And then that's it. They like go their own separate ways, don't really talk to each other. No, there's no romance in their marriage. You know, the men have to find, you know, that's why there's like the whole industry created to enhance this male gaze or to feed in and make them feel better about being sexual beings. And men are allowed to be over hypersexual and women are not supposed to be sexual at all. And it's just also about finding that balance and educating that in space.
Did anyone else want to just jump in and just have a quick comment on that, on the question?
Whenever the conversation comes up about parents and sex, I'm like, I'm sure they don't know enough.
Yeah,
you know? They don't. They just don't. Yeah, I'm really supportive of. Yeah, and I would rather not get half-baked, absolutely misinformed by listening to whatever they have to offer. Not blaming them, but in a way, probably blaming them because they probably feed into a system which just perpetuates this misinformation. But the truth is, I'm very supportive of all efforts where they're trying to bring in parents and build tools and resources like what probably Varuna was talking about, which helps parents have better sex ed talk with their kids. But the fact is, I think we also have to be realistic that it's possible in most cases that we are not going to get the right, most affirming and most consent and pleasure-focused conversation from our parents ever.
Yeah.
Let's search somewhere else. Maybe it's in schools. Maybe it's some other sort of socialization that we can build. You know, maybe it's like a group, or maybe social media spaces can be built that way. Because the truth is, and the tragic fact is that for a lot of women, even today, their first sexual experience is not consensual. It's not pleasure-based. There are definitely many women in India and anywhere in the world who probably have multiple children, but probably have not even seen a penis well. They do not understand their body well. They do not know that vulva is different from vagina. So you are also expecting information from persons who really have had no such access. And beyond the point when life has taken over and it's about parenting, it's about navigating gender roles in their homes, sex and sex education and that sort of conversation is going to take a back seat. And also, let's understand that us as Indians do not understand nudity as being something empowering at all. Most of the times, our bodies are a source of shame. It is probably discussed in very, like you said, item number sort of way. And also the conversation about body positivity and empowerment is very skewed. It's very non-representational still. There is not enough diversity there still. So there is, even if you don't have shame, then you at least have active confusion about how to feel about your body, how to present it, how to navigate consent when you have no clothes on, when you have all clothes on, or stuff like that. It's really confusing. And a lot of persons also unfortunately face if not active sexual violence, and a lot of very confusing sexual experiences in their college or in their early 20s. And a lot of that starts informing and building up. So I think we need to prepare children better. Also acknowledge that this exposure to sexual content is getting, younger and younger children have access to it now. So I also realized, like, I, a 10-year-old, had absolutely no clue, but a 10-year-old today is much more misinformed or informed. I don't know, but definitely has access to sexual material, very easy access to it.
Yeah.
So they are starting to learn and be misinformed very early in life. So don't wait for them to maybe hit the teens before you have a conversation or before you allow something. It's starting very early. So parents, if they can come through, if they learn, great. But I think we have to look beyond that also.
Yeah, Jagisha, did you have anything to say? Just really quick. Nothing else? All right. So I think this brings us to the end of today's panel. We at Sakshi are extremely grateful to all the panelists who joined today. Thank you so much for engaging with us and exploring the nuances and the convictions and the beliefs that we have in our society, because there's so many things that need to be challenged on an everyday basis. There's so many myths and ideas that are so pernicious in our society. Even like as everyone has talked about, we need to ensure that we are challenging the ways in which we occupy our positions in society and the narratives that come along with that. So thank you to everyone who asked questions and opening up a dynamic dialogue about many of the topics that were discussed today. I just would like to also thank Ritu Rastogi and Supratim Sen Arpu, the US-based entertainment company, for their relentless support. So talking about compassionate communities, the Rakshan Project by Sakshi is a youth-led movement through which we are reaching out to 40 lakh NSS volunteers and students across the nation to become Rakshans, who are preventers of child sexual abuse. So through systemic intervention, we believe we can disrupt cycles of violence and establish a new normal level of compassion, accountability, and empathy. So we request everyone to please consider donating to our fundraiser on Give India and support us to make homes a safe space. So we have a small film that we're just going to leave everyone with. So good evening and thank you to everyone. Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, Mahima, Varna, and Jagisha. It was an incredible pleasure to talk to all of you. I learned a lot today. I have a lot of things to think about today, so I'm really grateful for this experience. Please stay around, stay tuned for the next panel that will start at 9 o'clock, but right now we're just gonna leave it to that film. All right, geez. Oh, okay, there we go.
I pledge I will not hesitate, I will not be afraid.
I will be confident and assured, I will speak up and listen. Walk hand in hand, take back the night again, and own the street.
I pledge I will do whatever it takes to make all homes safe at all times, for all genders, from all backgrounds.
शपथ लेते हैं सीमित सोच के दायरों को हम तोड़ देंगे, एक दूसरे के साथ जुड़ के आगे बढ़ेंगे, एक सोच अनेक स्वर में आवाज बुलंद करेंगे.
We pledge that we will not wait anymore for any other to give me what was always mine.
We know today we are the ones we've been waiting for.
We pledge I am a Rakshan.
I am a Rakshan.
I am a Rakshan.
I am a Rakshan.
I am a Rakshan and I will make India safe.
Let's work collectively, beyond ourselves, for ourselves.
Donate to Sakshi's campaign on Give India Foundation.
Interrupt the cycle of sexual violence.
If you are safe, then so am I. 'Cause there is no me and mine, no you and me. It's only us, it's only us.
It has to be.
Let's do what it takes. Let's do what we can. Each one will be safe.
It has to be.
Let's do what it takes. Let's do what we can. And that is the plan.
It has to be.
If you are safe, then so am I. 'Cause there is no being divided. No you and me. It's only us. It's only us.
It has to be.
Let's do what it takes. Let's do what we can. Each one will be safe.
It has to be.
Let's do what it takes. Let's do what we can. And that is the plan. It's happened. We never thought it would, but it's happened. It's happened. We never thought it would, but it's happened. We drew the lines of me and mine. We were such fools, we missed the bus. It's not you, it's not me, it's only us. 'Cause I am you and you are me. There's no difference, can't you see? It's not you, it's not you, it's not me, it's only us.
It has to be.
Let's do what it takes, let's do what we can. Each one will be safe.
It has to be.